Morning all, let's have a look at Nakamura's round 3 game against Venezuela. So he was up against GM Eduardo Iturrizaga 2627, so Nc3 Qd7 at the time of this game, d4, and we saw the interesting Dutch defence, and White plays now an anti-Dutch system with Knight c3. Note that Knight c3 blocks the c-pawn, which means actually if Black ever plays d5, it's not so easy to arrange undermining d5 with c4. That's the important consideration here after Knight f6, Bishop g5, for whether Black can play d5 or not. Statistically, d5 is much more playable, I think, here in this position than, say, in this position, Bishop g5, Knight f6, because taking here, as I've experienced, is quite painful for Black. If Black ever plays d5, then c4, Knight c3, there's immediate pressure on the d5 square. So I had that against an IM Lauren da Costa in recent London Classic. Okay, so if you're a Dutch defence player, this is already quite interesting. So what to do about Knight c3? Well, Knight f6 is playable, Bishop g5, and now Naka does indeed play d5 here. Not too worried about Bishop f6. Bishop f6 is played here, Bishop takes f6, E takes f6, and these two pawns do provide control over the e4 square, but there's a blockade point here on f4, and it will be quite difficult sometimes for Black to have strategic pawn breaks. We'll see from this game how this game evolved. e3, marking out that f4 square. Bishop e6. After Bishop d3 now we see the move Knight c6. Okay, Knight Ge2 and Queen d7, as though Naka is interested in casting queenside here. a3, and now g5, as though Black is actually still interested in playing f4. It doesn't matter here about weaknesses. Black has the bishop here to cover up the weaknesses, so it's okay in this position to have that pawn on d5. But okay, but White still has a grip on f4 now. He literally does play f4, creating that cast iron restraint on Black's position. Naka plays Bishop d6. After Queen d2, it looks as though the position is very locked up already. Castles, and now f5 is subject to potential frontal attack here. If Black doesn't play g4, then f5 is now a problem, with White having the option of takes and Bishop f5 at various points if the Queen and Bishop are not protecting. So you can imagine in this position, for example, Knight g3 being a problem, potentially. In this position, Naka played g4, but let's have a look. If Black can avoid playing g4, say he does castle, let's say Knight g3 here. Okay, it may be actually okay because of the dynamics. It might actually be quite hard to target f5. So possibly g4 is not needed actually. If Black can just castle or rook g8 and not worry about playing g4 just yet, that's an option. Okay, it was just a slight consideration about this f5 being tested here. So g4 was played, yeah. G4 in this position was played, which releases basically a little bit of tension in the position. I assume, by the way, Naka might have been a bit tired, yeah, from round 2. He had that huge game. He did win the day before against Lithuania, Grandmaster Manisakursis, more than a 100 move game. I don't know, he might have been at this point content for a draw on this day. So g4 is a tension releaser. Rook fc1, as though white is interested in playing now c4 later on if he moves the knight. In fact, he does move the knight. b3 preparing c4, and c4. Now the king going here is now safer probably than castling queenside, because this c4 c5, you can imagine having a pawn on c5 and then b4 b5. The king doesn't really want to be here. Okay, so that also kind of is more justification for this g4 move, that the king isn't going to be woken up on the f file as easily. Okay, so c4 now, c6, and white seems very content with a draw now by playing c5. The position is getting really locked up, although b4 does promise a strategic break available to white for b5. h5, knight comes to c3, h4, a4. Now black is content to lock up the king side with h3. We get a full fortress now, g3, on this side of the board. So you can't really imagine this breaking down unless black sacrifices a piece or something, a knight on h4 maybe. But other than that, it seems difficult to undermine this chain now that it's all been closed up here. Rook hb8, and then we see is white, who's left with that one strategic break, going to play that at some point. Black is reinforcing himself now with this battery against white playing b5, and then a5, locking up the position. If white was going for a win, I think he'd have to play for b5 here. e3 is covered up here, so I don't know here. a5 is a signal, a clear signal that white is content to lock up the position. White has technically an advantage according to engines. b5 is given as a reasonable move actually here. So say a takes, rook a3. Let's go with this line. And here b6, space gaining. You might think, well, could white actually win this sort of position? Let's have a look further at an infiltration down the a file. Queen a8, or queen a7, queen a8. If we get this position, can white actually win this? Let's go for this knight maneuver. I think a knight maneuver over to a5. I think that's been prompted here. And then what? What does white do here? It looks like a fortress. Although now, actually, something's been spotted. Okay, let's go with this. The other knight could come somewhere to do something. Is actually knight takes c6 and b7 on the cards. Now don't tell me the bishop's going to come to a4. No, we have a winning plan here emerge. Knight takes b7. I know this is a bit outrageous. This is probably the longest variation I've ever shown to see if the fortress can be broken down. Queen takes b7. Bishop a6. So sacking that knight. Bishop takes, knight takes. Queen b8. And what is the threat now? Probably something like b7. Okay, so say black moves the king, for example, b7, knight moves, queen a7 or a8, just queening. So and if black reacts here with okay, forget king f7, bishop takes b6, C takes. So yes, it looks as though, okay, conclusion from this position, if white wants a winning chance, I think b5 is the point here on move 24. He might be a bit concerned about his higher rated Super Grandmaster opponent to lock up the position with a5 here. But yeah, it looks as though that's the strategic break available to white. If nothing else, to just get an extreme space advantage, which can be used as a basis for manoeuvring and putting pressure on b7 and c6. Let's just review that variation again. So instead of a5, b5, if we get this position with rooks coming off and the queen coming in, knight's rerouting to probe b6 and c6, b7 and c6, then we have the potential for a knight sack, an extreme knight sack. If bishop takes b7 here, again bishop a6, in this position queen a8, and now b7 is really hard to stop. Okay, that's just queening. It's queening here. So this is dangerous. This pawn on b6. So okay, in the game, white kind of chickened out with a5. Okay, and now we definitely have got a fortress. It's like both GMs are saying, basically, okay, let's have a draw. The knight comes into b6. Doesn't have to be taken. Okay. And here a draw was agreed. White's got pressure also, of course, to consider on f5. So after queen c2, a draw offer I think must have been made, and that was it. Game drawn. Okay, maybe not the most interesting draw, but in overview and summary, yes, this line, it seems in this position with the knight blocking the c pawn, it's a lot more playable to play d5 here, and black can try and play for f4 as the game shows. White blockaded f4 quite a lot. Black maybe not wanting to keep the tension too much on the king side, is thinking, well, could keep the option of king f7 as in the game now if white's playing for c4. In any case, slow build up for c4. And okay, white doesn't take the opportunity for b5. White plays a5 and we get a full lockdown on the position. And draw agreed here. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.